Chi-square is the analytic expression of a categorical quantitative design. It is chosen when the research problem and literature gap point to a need to understand whether groups or categories are connected, rather than whether variables are related numerically, predicted, or compared using averages. Chi-square answers a different kind of question than correlation or regression because the data represent counts of people or cases placed into categories, not scores that measure how much of something a person has. Chi-square is designed to examine whether there is an association between two categorical variables. A categorical variable is a variable made up of groups or labels rather than numbers that measure amount, such as instructional modality, gender, participation status, or completion status. The variables define the categories, but the observations are the people or cases being sorted into those categories. In dissertation research, chi-square is almost always chi-square of independence, which asks whether the categories of one variable are independent of the categories of another variable. Independent here means not influencing one another. Association, in categorical terms, means that certain categories appear together more or less often than would be expected by chance. An association exists when specific combinations of categories occur more frequently, or less frequently, than we would expect if there were no connection between the variables. Unlike correlation, association does not describe direction or numeric strength. It describes patterns of co-occurrence among categories. For a research question to align with chi-square, it must include the word association. This word must appear explicitly in the question itself. Other verbs such as relationship, predict, compare, or difference are misaligned because they signal numeric relationships, prediction, or mean differences rather than categorical co-occurrence. When the word association is used, it signals that the study is asking whether categories are connected in a meaningful way based on observed counts. Chi-square requires two categorical variables. Each variable consists of mutually exclusive categories, meaning each person or case can belong to only one category for each variable. Data is collected by counting how many observations fall into each combination of categories. Numeric scores, scale totals, averages, or percentages are not appropriate for chi-square because they measure amount rather than category membership. In chi-square analysis, the data must represent observations, meaning individual people or cases that are counted into categories. Each observation represents one person or one case, and each observation appears in one and only one cell of the table. This matters because chi-square is built on counting how many people fall into each category combination. If the same person were counted more than once, the pattern would be artificially inflated and would no longer represent reality. Scores represent magnitude, not membership, and averages remove the individual level information that chi-square depends on. Percentages also cannot replace counts because they hide the actual number of observations on which the pattern is based. Two tables can show the same percentages, but represent very different numbers of people. Chi-square requires raw counts, so it can compare the observed pattern of cases to the pattern that would be expected if the variables were independent. Chi-square data are organized in a contingency table. A contingency table is simply a grid that shows how many observations fall into each combination of categories. Each cell in the table contains an observed count, which is the actual number of people or cases in that category combination. The test compares these observed counts to expected counts. An observed count is the number of actual people or cases that fall into a specific category combination in your contingency table. If your two variables are instructional modality, online in person, and course completion status, completed not completed, then the observed count in the online plus completed cell is literally how many students in your dataset were both online and completed. You are not averaging anything and you are not using scores. You are counting how many real observations land in each box. Expected counts are what the table would look like if there were no association between the two variables. No association means the completion pattern would be the same across modalities, so any differences you see would just be random variation. Expected counts are not guessed. They are calculated from the marginal totals, which are the row totals, column totals, and the grand total. Chi-square relies on several assumptions that matter conceptually. Observations must be independent, meaning one person's category placement does not influence another person's placement. Categories must be mutually exclusive, so that observations are not counted more than once. Expected counts must be sufficiently large for the test to be stable, because chi-square is built on frequency patterns rather than individual scores. When assumptions are violated, the study is not automatically invalid, but the results become harder to interpret confidently. Very small expected counts can make the chi-square statistic unstable and overly sensitive to random variation. Sparse tables often occur when sample sizes are small or when too many categories are used. In these cases, researchers may need to collapse categories or clearly acknowledge limitations. The emphasis is on judgment, transparency, and alignment rather than technical fixes. Chi-square results are interpreted in terms of whether an association exists between variables. Statistical significance means that the observed pattern of counts is unlikely to be due to chance alone. Statistical significance does not tell you how strong or meaningful the association is in real terms. That information comes from an effect size, which describes how strong the association is. For chi-square, a common effect size is Kramer's V, which helps describe whether the association is small, moderate, or large. Because chi-square relies on counts, sample size plays an important role in interpretation. Very small samples can make it difficult to detect real associations, even when they exist. A non-significant chi-square result may reflect limited power rather than the absence of an association. Power refers to the ability of a study to detect a real pattern when one is present. Examples help ground this logic. One study might ask whether there is an association between instructional modality and course completion status. Another might examine whether there is an association between participation in academic support services and retention status. In both cases, individuals are counted into categories, and the analysis evaluates whether the observed pattern of counts differs from what would be expected if the variables were unrelated. Chi-square is not appropriate when variables are continuous, when prediction is the goal, or when group means are being compared. It should not be used to analyze scores, averages, or scale totals. Using chi-square in those situations reflects a mismatch between the research question and the analytic method. When chi-square is chosen, that choice should be visible throughout the study. The research problem should point to categorical patterns. The literature gap should justify the need to examine association. The purpose statement should name chi-square clearly, and the research question should include the word association. When these elements align, chi-square becomes a coherent and defensible analytic choice rather than a misapplied statistical tool.